For 40 years, a secret lay dormant under her skin. She called it a simple birthmark, a flawed part of her. But when her grandson's innocent question exposed it, a decades-old lie began to unravel, threatening her life. Clara's life was a watercolor painting, soft-edged and serene. At 60, her days in the sun-drenched coastal town of Port Blossom were measured in the gentle rhythm of tides and the blooming of her prize-winning roses. Her husband, Robert, an architect whose hands had shaped city skylines, now found contentment in shaping the trellises for her climbing jasmine. Their love, forged over 35 years, was a quiet, comfortable thing, a home built of shared glances and finished sentences. The mark on her right hip was just another part of this well-worn life. A purplish, slightly raised patch of skin, she'd called it her flawed birthmark for as long as anyone could remember. It was a private imperfection, usually hidden, easily ignored. She'd dismiss Robert's occasional prodding to have it checked with a wave of her hand. "It's been with me forever, darling. It's just a part of my landscape." That landscape was violently remapped on a sweltering July afternoon. The air smelled of chlorine and grilled hot dogs. Their backyard was a kaleidoscope of happy chaos. Their daughter, Sarah, and her family were visiting. Robert was manning the grill, and Sarah was in a mock water gun battle with her husband. Clara sat by the pool, a wide-brimmed hat shielding her face, watching her 6-year-old grandson, Leo, practice his cannonballs. After one particularly impressive splash, Leo paddled over to her, his small face serious. He hoisted himself onto the edge of the pool, water streaming from his hair, and pointed a chubby finger at her hip, exposed by the cut of her swimsuit. "Nana," he asked, his voice piercing the cheerful din, "why do you have a wrinkly raisin on your leg?" The world seemed to halt. The sizzle of the grill, the laughter, the splashing, it all faded into a dull hum. Clara felt a cold dread wash over her, a stark contrast to the summer heat. Sarah, hearing her son, laughed nervously. "Leo, that's not polite. That's just Nana's birthmark." But Leo, with the unyielding curiosity of a child, pressed on. "It looks all bumpy. Like a bug." Robert turned from the grill, his smile faltering as he saw the look on Clara's face. She had gone pale beneath her tan, her hand instinctively moving to cover the mark. The exchange was brief, but it was a stone tossed into the placid pond of their lives. That evening, after the guests had gone and the house was quiet again, Robert broke the silence. "He didn't mean anything by it, Clara." "I know," she said, her voice tight. He sat beside her on the porch swing, taking her hand. It felt cold. "But it's not a raisin, and it's not a bug. And it has changed. It's darker than it was last summer." His architect's eye for detail, usually a source of comfort, now felt like an interrogation lamp. "Promise me you'll call Dr. Evans on Monday. No more excuses." Clara looked away, towards the garden where shadows were swallowing her roses. The secret she had kept buried for 4 decades, a secret she had convinced herself was a harmless part of her, had just been dragged into the light by a 6-year-old boy. And for the first time, she felt the ground beneath her shift, threatening to give way. Dr. Evans, a man who had treated Clara's occasional flus and Robert's tennis elbow for 20 years, clicked his pen with a thoughtful frown. "I'll be honest, Clara, this doesn't present like a typical birthmark," he said, peering at her hip through a magnifying lens. "The texture, the irregular borders. I'd feel much better if you let a specialist take a look." The referral was to Dr. Eris Thorne, a dermatologist whose name was spoken with a mix of reverence and surprise in their small town. He was brilliant, they said, having left a prestigious position in a major city to open a practice here. His clinic was a world away from Dr. Evans' cozy, wood-paneled office. It was all glass and steel, minimalist and unnervingly modern. Dr. Thorne was young, sharp, with eyes that seemed to see more than just the surface of things. He listened patiently as Clara gave her well-rehearsed speech about her lifelong birthmark. He didn't interrupt, simply nodding, his gaze analytical. "Mrs. Michelson," he said when she finished, his tone gentle but firm, "let's get some high-resolution images and then we'll discuss a biopsy." The word biopsy hung in the sterile air. As the medical assistant prepped the area, the clinical cold of the room began to seep into Clara's bones. The sharp, antiseptic smell triggered something deep within her. A flash. The scent of dust and something acrid, metallic. The scream of twisting metal. She flinched, her breath catching in her throat. "Are you all right?" Dr. Thorne asked, noticing her distress. "Fine," she lied, her heart hammering. "Just a little nervous." The nightmares started that night. Not the vague, shadowy dreams of aging, but vivid, sensory-rich terrors. She was back in a city of rubble, the air thick with smoke and the shouts of men in a language she once understood. She felt the weight of a camera in her hands, the familiar click of the shutter, a desperate attempt to impose order on chaos. Then, the blinding flash, the roar that deafened her, and a searing heat in her side. She would wake up gasping, her hand clamped to her hip, the sheets damp with sweat. Robert held her, his quiet strength a fragile dam against the flood of her past. "It's just the stress of the tests, honey," he'd soothe, but they both knew it was more than that. 2 days later, Dr. Thorne's office called. He wanted to see them to discuss the biopsy results. The walk down the clinic's hallway felt endless. "The results are inconclusive," Dr. Thorne began, choosing his words with surgical precision. "There are abnormal cells, yes. But they don't conform to any standard malignancy. The tissue is unusually dense, and it's organized in a way I've never encountered. It's almost structured." He showed them magnified images on a screen, a chaotic yet strangely ordered latticework of cells. "Whatever this is, it needs to come out. All of it. I've scheduled a full excision for next Tuesday." He paused, his gaze resting on Clara. "And Mrs. Michelson, the lab found something else. Microscopic metallic traces. Have you ever had an injury in that area? Any kind of accident involving metal?" Clara's mind screamed. The car bomb. The shrapnel. The makeshift clinic in a Beirut basement. But her voice was a whisper. "No. Nothing I can recall." The operating room was a cold, bright world of its own, governed by the steady beep of monitors and the hushed efficiency of the surgical team. Clara lay on her side, a blue sterile drape isolating the small, flawed landscape of her hip. Dr. Thorne, now a figure behind a mask and magnification loupes, began the excision. "Scalpel," he said, his voice calm and focused. The initial incision was routine. But as he delved deeper, his confident movements slowed. "The tissue is even more fibrous than the biopsy suggested," he murmured, more to himself than to the attending surgeon beside him. "It's not just a growth, it's a network. The tendrils are anchored deep into the fascia." And, the head surgical nurse with 30 years of experience etched around her eyes, leaned in. "Doctor, the base of the mass, it's pulsing. Independently of her arterial rhythm." It was true. A faint, slow thrum emanated from the core of the tissue, a life beat all its own. A ripple of unease passed through the team. This was straying far from the textbook. Dr. Thorne worked with meticulous care, snipping and cauterizing the strange, root-like extensions. He was determined to remove the entire structure intact for pathology. "We're approaching the core now," he announced, his voice tight with concentration. "I'm seeing a reflection. Something metallic." The team leaned closer. With delicate forceps, Dr. Thorne carefully dissected the final layers of the dense, abnormal tissue. A dark, misshapen object began to emerge from its fleshy cocoon. It wasn't a surgical clip or a stray needle. It was jagged, twisted, a piece of shrapnel. "My God," the assisting surgeon breathed. "It must have been in there for decades." Dr. Thorne's focus was absolute. He worked his instruments around the fragment, gently prying it loose from the cavity it had inhabited for so long. The moment he lifted the piece of metal free, a corroded, 1-inch shard of steel, the unthinkable happened. The tissue of the now empty cavity did not simply bleed or collapse. It writhed. It was a convulsive, visible contraction, as if a living thing had been ripped from its shell. The edges of the wound drew inward, the surrounding muscle spasming in a grotesque, silent scream. And, the veteran nurse, let out a strangled gasp. She stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with a horror that transcended medical comprehension. Her small cry was the only sound that broke the spell. Then, an absolute, profound silence fell over the operating room. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor seemed unnaturally loud. Scalpels were held motionless. Every eye was fixed on the gaping wound, which had just demonstrated a biological response that belonged in a science fiction film, not a regional hospital. Dr. Thorne stood frozen for a beat, the piece of shrapnel held aloft in his forceps like a cursed relic. He broke the silence, his voice strained but steady. "What in God's name?" He placed the metal fragment into a sterile specimen container with a trembling hand. The tissue had now stilled, but the image of its movement was seared into the minds of everyone present. "It's like, it was built around it," he whispered, his scientific curiosity battling with sheer disbelief. "Like the shrapnel was its skeleton." He looked at his team, at their pale, shocked faces. "Let's close. Now. And someone get me a full toxicology and metallurgy workup on this fragment, stat." The procedure was completed in near silence, the usual operating room banter replaced by a heavy, shared sense of awe and dread. They had not just removed a growth, they had disturbed something ancient and unknown. Recovery was a promise that failed to materialize. Instead of waking to relief, Clara descended into a feverish hell. The first day, she was groggy but stable. By the second, an angry red blush spread from the incision site, hot and painful to the touch. By the third morning, she was delirious, her temperature soaring to 104. The surgical site, which should have been healing, was now a swollen, weeping wound. "It's not a standard infection," Dr. Thorne explained to a frantic Robert and Sarah in the hallway of the ICU. "The antibiotics aren't touching it. It's a massive inflammatory response, a cytokine storm. Her body is attacking itself. It's as if removing that fragment triggered some kind of catastrophic alarm." Clara drifted in a fog of pain and memory, the sterile scent of the ICU blending with the dust of Beirut. She murmured names Robert didn't know, fragments of French and Arabic. In a moment of terrifying lucidity, she grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with fear. "The box, Robert," she rasped, her voice a dry crackle. "My old studio, under the floorboards. The key is with my brushes. You have to see." Her words dissolved into a fit of coughing, and she slipped back into unconsciousness. Leaving Sarah to stand vigil, Robert drove home in a daze. He'd never known Clara to have a studio before they met. He found the old, detached shed at the back of their property, long used for storing garden tools. After prying up a loose floorboard, his fingers brushed against cold metal. It was a small, heavy-duty iron box, rusted at the hinges. The key, as she'd said, was in a dusty jar of hardened paintbrushes. With a creak of protest, the lock turned. The contents stole his breath. There was no jewelry, no old love letters. Instead, there was a worn leather-bound journal, a tarnished press pass with a photo of a startlingly young Clara, her face intense and fearless, issued by a global news agency. And at the bottom, a single, sealed roll of 35mm film. He opened the journal. The first page was a letter, her familiar script now tight and urgent, dated over 30 years ago. "My dearest Robert," it began. "If you are reading this, it means the wall I built has crumbled. It means the secret I carry has become too heavy, or my time to carry it has run out. You must know the truth. The woman you married, the quiet art teacher, is a ghost. The real me died in Beirut in 1982. I wasn't a tourist caught in the crossfire. I was a photojournalist. I went there chasing a story, chasing a name for myself. I wanted to capture the truth of the war. And I did. I got too close. I was documenting the movements of a militia leader, a man responsible for unspeakable atrocities. I was in a marketplace when his men detonated a car bomb meant for a rival. It was chaos. Fire, screams, the smell of cordite and burning flesh. I was hit. A piece of the bomb tore into my hip. A local family dragged me into their basement and a doctor, a veterinarian I think, pulled out what he could and stitched me up with a fishing line. But a piece remained. When I was finally evacuated, I was terrified. The militia leader knew a foreign journalist had been in that market. If they found me, found my camera. The roll of film in this box is the evidence. It has images of his men planting the device, images taken moments before the blast. I was a coward, Robert. I was so scared of being hunted down, so broken by what I'd seen, that I buried it. I buried the film, I buried my career, I buried that girl with the camera. I came home and created Clara, the gentle artist. The shrapnel in my hip became a birthmark. A daily, physical reminder of my failure. I'm so sorry for the lie. It was the only way I knew how to survive. Robert sank to the dusty floor, the letter trembling in his hands. 40 years. 40 years she had carried this war inside her, a physical and emotional wound that he had never even seen. The quiet, the nightmares, the fierce privacy, it all snapped into focus. He wasn't married to a ghost. He was married to a survivor. Robert returned to the hospital, the iron box clutched in his hand. He found Dr. Thorne and Sarah poring over lab reports, their faces grim. "We have a theory," Dr. Thorne said, his voice edged with a strange mix of exhaustion and intellectual excitement. "It's a paradox, but it's the only thing that fits." He pulled up a complex diagram on a monitor. The metallurgy on the shrapnel shows it was leaching trace amounts of lead and other heavy metals. Over 40 years, that should have caused chronic, fatal poisoning. But it didn't. We believe Clara's body, in a 1 in a billion immunological response, didn't just form scar tissue. It created a highly specialized, bio-intelligent capsule around the fragment. He pointed to the screen. This tissue wasn't just a wall, it was an active filtration system. It was neutralizing the toxins, metabolizing them. Her body had adapted to the poison, creating its own antidote. It was a perfect, self-contained ecosystem. Until we removed it, Robert finished, the pieces clicking into place. Exactly, Dr. Thorne confirmed. We didn't just remove a piece of metal. We removed the keystone of an arch she'd been building internally for 40 years. Her immune system, suddenly deprived of the very toxins it was designed to fight, went haywire. It's an autoimmune crisis triggered by a sudden absence of a chronic threat. This new understanding was the turning point. They couldn't kill the infection, they had to calm the immune system that was causing it. The treatment plan shifted dramatically, from aggressive antibiotics to powerful immunosuppressants and chelation therapy to gently coax the residual metals from her system. For 2 days, the battle raged in the silent theater of Clara's body. Robert never left her side. He held her hand, whispering to her, telling her he knew everything and that it didn't matter. He told her she was the bravest person he had ever known. He read to her from her journal, not the parts about the war, but the parts about her love for light and shadow, for the faces of the people she met. On the 3rd day, her fever broke. Her first conscious act was to squeeze his hand. Her eyes fluttered open, hazy at first, then focusing on his face. The ventilator was still in place, but she was there. She was back. "I know," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I found the box." "I know, Clara." A single tear traced a path down her temple. It wasn't a tear of sorrow or shame. It was a tear of release. The wall had crumbled, and instead of judgment, she had found love waiting on the other side. Later, after the ventilator was removed, she spoke her first words, a faint whisper that held the weight of a lifetime. "The film, is it safe?" "It's safe," Robert assured her, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "We're all safe now." 6 months later, the scent of turpentine and linseed oil once again filled Clara's new studio, a bright, airy space Robert had converted from the old shed. Her recovery was a slow masterpiece, each day adding a new layer of strength. The scar on her hip was a pale, silvery line, no longer a mark of shame, but a testament to survival. The roll of film, once a source of terror, became her legacy. Sarah, their lawyer daughter, had the film professionally developed. The black and white images were grainy but powerful, a haunting, undeniable record of a forgotten atrocity. Working with an international human rights organization, Sarah helped submit the photographs, anonymously, to a war crimes tribunal. The images sent ripples through the geopolitical world, reopening a cold case and giving a name to ghosts. Clara, however, found her own peace not in justice, but in creation. She began to paint again, but her work was different now. The soft watercolors were gone, replaced by bold, abstract canvases filled with fractured light and deep, resonant shadows. She was no longer hiding from the darkness, she was painting it, taming it, transforming it into something beautiful and profound. This afternoon, Leo sat beside her on a small stool, a paintbrush clutched in his fist. He wasn't painting war or memory, he was painting a lopsided, bright yellow sun. "Look, Nana," he said, holding up his creation. "I made it shiny." Clara smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that reached her eyes. She dipped her own brush in gold paint and added a few flecks to his sun. "Yes, you did," she said. "Sometimes, the most beautiful things come from the most broken places. You just have to be brave enough to add a little light." Her story is a powerful reminder that our deepest wounds and our greatest strengths can be intertwined. The secrets we keep to protect ourselves can become the very prisons that hold us captive. What truths are you carrying? And what might happen if you finally let them see the light? Share your thoughts with respect in the comments below. Your story matters. And if this story moved you, please consider sharing it and subscribing for more tales of human resilience.